The opinions expressed in the following video are not in their entirety endorsed by this podcast. They are instead the focus of our discussion today. This is your content warning.
I was just told, like, you just have to share the gospel. But I've learned that God doesn't want us to push it onto people. Rather, he needs relatability first. So we have to kind of unlearn a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
So I've learned, like, because I've been there, like, I don't like people preaching all up in my ear. And you know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like people truly need to hear the gospel, but not in a way that we've been taught, where it's like push it onto them and break their arm, even if you got to save them type stuff.
That's good.
We all have that interconnection through sin, right? So we just gotta continuously be real with people. Like, you cannot cast out hate with hate. You gotta cast out despair and hate with hope and love.
Yeah.
So in order for me to plant, I just tell them, listen, this is what Jesus did for me, and that's what God has done in my life, right? I just tell them what God has done in my life, and I become vulnerable for them. So that when you're vulnerable to people, they then have this launching pad of like, okay, I got a safe space now where I could just be vulnerable too.
Audio Jungle.
Joshua, welcome back.
Hey man, good to see you.
How are you?
I'm great. It's
You're
nice
great.
to see you in a new office. That's cool.
Dude, it's weird. This is day 2 in new office. It's still getting kind of put together. But yeah, bit of a new environment for me. Super excited about it. Started on Sunday here at Martin, and so can't wait to really get going with that. Right now, it's a lot of trying to figure out how to communicate with everybody and figure out what's currently on the calendar, what's coming up, and that sort of stuff. But biggest thing for us right now is raining. I don't know about where you guys are, but it's we've been without rain for feels like a month and a half or more. So now that the harvest is finally here, it's raining again.
Right.
So that's awesome. But anyway, man, how are you doing?
We're good, man. Just a day at a time. My office is tore all to pieces right now because they're painting the church building over the next couple of weeks. So I'll be working from home after today for the rest of this week. And then Kayla and I are taking 4 days to go to Maine, taking a little trip up there. So never been, looking forward to it. So that'll be fun.
Hey, that sounds exciting.
There's everything going on in my world right now.
That's super exciting. Well, guys, welcome back into the Content Warning Podcast. This is a Bible Meets Culture podcast where we break down the difference between biblical content and modern theology. And Joshua, really excited today. Conversation that we've talked about having for, a while, but maybe even more specifically over the last couple of weeks. And it's never a surprise when we have a guest on who's the smartest guy in the room. And definitely the case today. Brandon Edwards is with us here today. If you don't know who Brandon is, that's him on the screen. I'm just going to kind of read through your Facebook blog here, blurb or whatever it is, Brandon. But Executive Director at Buckeyes for Christ.
Yep.
Big one right there. College minister at the Church of Christ on Fissinger Road, if I said that correctly. I'm sure I botched that to some capacity. But you also used to work for Harbinger Institute. You work for an organization called Story, as well as Hidden Bridge Media. I could keep going on and on and on, and really
Please don't
a little bit. But Brandon is definitely the smartest guy in the room. But we are so excited to have you. Thank you so much for being on, man. I know that you have a crazy busy schedule, lots going on in your life personally over the last couple of weeks. And so thank you, man, for being on. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. I'm highly overrated, but I appreciate the intro and the rest. I've often heard it said it's dangerous to be the smartest person in the room, and so I'm grateful I'm not. I really am not. I have really good PR, apparently. That's the one thing I seem to have going for me, so I appreciate that.
Well, sometimes it's just me and Joshua's stuck being the smartest guy in the room because he's always the smartest guy in the room. It's just the two of us. But we're going to have a conversation today, guys, and I'm really excited about it. A little bit, again, different of a conversation than we're used to because the video that you just watched or heard, depending on how you find this podcast, is not going to be as much of a rebuttal as much as it is going to be a springboard for a lot of thoughts moving forward. And so if you are familiar with current events, this conversation will probably hit home just because a lot of people have been kind of asking, hey, how do we respond to certain things? How do we encourage people to continue to go on and share the gospel? Right, that's what the video
Yeah.
was kind of talking about. How do we go out and share the gospel? And so, for you guys, first things first, let's just, what's your first thoughts on the video?
Well, I thought the video had a relatively good message to wake Christians up.
Mm,
The idea that how you live your life, it doesn't have to just be the preacher on the street corner with the signs and the megaphone.
mm,
Your life is the best sermon that you can preach in a lot of instances, and relationships bring people to the Lord. So that's good. The thing about not being in people's face with the gospel, I think I understand the message that was trying to get across. But if you're living your life as a Christian and you're unapologetically walking in the light, in a world that we live in, you're going to be in people's faces with that. It's going to be countercultural in every way. So, you don't shine your light and hide it under a bushel. So I'll be honest. I've preached in a pulpit minister position for the past 10 years in some capacity, and evangelism has never really been my area of expertise. And so I'm very much interested in hearing Brandon's point of view on this,
mm.
because I need help in this,
Hmm.
really. So I'm really looking forward to this.
Well, the opening point for all of this to me is that when I watched the video, I'd seen bits of it before, and I've seen the guy before in some way or another. And I don't disagree, in fact, with the sentiment, the overall aspect of it, because far too often we are, and really what he gets at is we're separated from people, that we're not in people's lives. And so there's a natural aspect when you talk about if you don't have a relationship, then you can't really have people listen to you. There's a part of that that's true. And it's mainly because both our culture and faith in general, we've compartmentalized into a building. We've made faith something that you do on Sunday, or in our case, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night.
Mm.
That those are the times in which faith happens. In fact, it's one of the downfalls of evangelism is that we've now made getting people to church our aspect and road of evangelism.
Mm.
So our number one thing is invite people to church. Well, if you don't have a relationship, I tell people we're so, especially within churches of Christ and the rest, we're so different compared to most churches, and that it is a shocking thing for people to come in and go, "Wait, what's happening here exactly? What are these words they're saying? What is this Christianese that they're speaking and these certain terminologies and the rest?" And it's because for many of us, it's the norm, and so we just assume that everyone else will feel comfortable in that setting. That's where I think the detachment happens the most. Is that we've started using our Sundays and our really our worship times as our number one evangelism tool, which has become our downfall. Because, and this is one of those things I always have to preface this. I tell people all the time, I don't invite people to church, and I should preface it even better. I don't invite people to worship.
Mm.
Worship is for the saved. Worship is for those who understand what it's meant to be and what's going on. I do, however, invite people to study the Bible any chance I get. So whether that's even a Sunday morning, sometimes in a Bible class, if we're going through a series, a Wednesday night, or whatever it may be. In our case on campus, it's Monday nights, it's Tuesday nights. We have studies, they're all during the week. That those are the times that relationships can happen. Just as a living example, tonight on campus, every Tuesday night, we have Canes, and we do a Bible study. Everyone's welcome and invited. This is the time when evangelism's happening. This is the moment in which we're trying to create both relationship and study the truth.
Hmm.
But I think the downside for so many of us, and why we can't figure out this relational aspect of things, is because we still believe that the best thing we can do is get people to a building on a certain morning,
Yeah.
as opposed to it being the day-to-day stuff that builds up to that.
I don't disagree at all. I know, Joshua, we've talked about it before, how so many Christians miss the concept of worship, um, primarily because we've turned worship into an evangelistic tool as opposed to
Yeah.
focusing on worship for what it is. And so, great points. Loved the video. I'm kind of along the lines with you guys, and we'll talk about it here in a little bit. I'd love to know what he meant when he was talking about forcing the gospel onto people, because I think when you say that, when you hear that, there's a very clear picture that comes into mind. And for me, it's always been walking around. It's going to sound weird, walking around downtown Nashville and seeing the
Mhm.
guy with the sign and the bullhorn, like
Yep.
screaming the gospel, right? Or some version of the gospel, right? And so I think maybe that's an unfair depiction of what
Mhm.
forcing the gospel onto people looks like. But maybe a better question is, Brandon, I'd love for you to talk
Mhm.
about this, just because of what I know has been going on in your work in
Yeah.
ministry, and I'd love for you to be able to talk about that. But one of the looming questions that kind of is hovering around people right now is, does the gospel actually work?
Yeah.
Are people wanting to receive this word, with all the stuff that's gone on in our country, with violence becoming a
Mhm.
more and more popular solution to disagreement?
Yeah.
Does the gospel actually work? Do people want to hear it?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. Yes, I mean, if you don't believe that, we're in trouble. If you don't believe that the Bible, I tell people all the time, our students, I've never converted anyone. God changes people's lives. God changes people's hearts. God's the one who does that. We're just the vessel, the tool that God sent into all this world to make disciples of all nations and the rest, not to disciple to ourselves, but to disciple to the image and glory of God. That's our goal consistently in those things, and that's where we have to kind of lean into that. The hardest part for us in all of this is that we miss out on really what it means to be Christians in the 21st century. And as you noted, kind of the street preacher concept.
Hmm.
There's a time and a place where those things worked. Door knocking. There was a time and a place where those things worked. Americans, when they used to come over to Italy when I was a kid, and they would want to go door knocking, I would go, "That's illegal. Plus, it's like 30-story buildings." Like if they even let you in the building, good luck. But what did work, and you have to be creative in what does work. How we can be creative in finding opportunities to really learn to seek people. This is where when he kind of mentioned in the video that concept of pushing back against the people kind of beating people over the head with the gospel. I have to say I get that, and that's also because there's a lot of people out there that's their number one thing. So where can you step into? Where can you be there to create opportunities? Well, the number one thing is you have to be there. You have to be in those places. So, for example, in my case, we have an office on campus. It's one thing for me to have a church building. I mean, our church building is 1.5 miles off campus. So technically speaking, it's not very far. But the elders and the rest said on campus, presence matters. Presence in the community, presence with the people. They have to know who you are. And from there, it's about the slow things, the little methodical little moments of looking for opportunities. And you noted just some stuff happens recently for us. When I got here 3 years ago, one of the things we started off with was we exist. We as a club, there's 65,000 students on this campus at Ohio State. There's over, I think at the time there was 1,700 student clubs.
Wow.
We're one of them.
Wow.
So how do you stand out in that? So our number one thing was we exist. The second year was we exist and we have a purpose. And then this third year is we wanted to be not necessarily seen. We wanted people to know that their gospel is being preached consistently. So we kind of have a natural aspect where we were doing that all 3 years, but we wanted to make it more and more visible to a point where it was the football team that reached out to us and knew of us from campus and said, "Hey, we saw you're a student group and the rest. Would you come and help us in this situation?" In essence, it was a long story short. We need people who know how to baptize. We need people who know how to teach about baptism. And my response was, if you let me, as long as you let me teach and there's no parameters and you let me follow up with the students, I'm there.
Yeah.
And from there, it's what snowballed from that. But how did they do that? It's because we built about looking for opportunities consistently to be seen and known in the community we are seeking to serve. That's oftentimes what's missing for a lot of our churches. We do what's called often reverse gospel meetings. Old school gospel meetings are fantastic. It's we choose a speaker, choose a topic, and choose a date and tell people to come to us. So imagine the opposite. Imagine you turn around and you go, you tell us what you'd like to hear, which means you have to have your thumb on the pulse of culture. You tell us what you're struggling with. We'll come to you and we'll speak to the things that are on your heart. That's the concept of evangelism in the 21st century. That's where we have to leave kind of our church buildings and get into the community around us.
Yeah. Absolutely. I heard it said a long time ago, and as much as the process may change, I had a preacher say that evangelism doesn't happen where people aren't, um,
Yeah.
and that's a super basic concept. And the methods change, but at its core, you have to be able to and willing. Maybe that's maybe another a bigger part. Maybe
Yeah.
today, you have to be willing to go and engage with people. Um, and so the idea or the question that becomes, does the gospel actually work? If as a Christian, I'm not gonna say if you doubt that, but if you can't buy into that, if you can't
Yeah.
firmly believe that the gospel can work, then maybe you probably aren't the best person to try to evangelize.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
you've got to be able to buy into that first, and I think that relates to maybe what we'll get to a little bit later about being vulnerable with people.
Mm.
But Joshua, Brennan, either one, kind of address the question that he asked of, do we need to relearn how to share the gospel as opposed to forcing it onto people? And then, and maybe even more specifically, what does that look like as we're
Mm.
relearning how to share the gospel with people? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember the words of Paul to become all things to all people. I think both of you have kind of hinted around this and even talked about it, but I'm going to kind of put a phrase to it. The message stays the same, even though the methods change. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I remember it's been 10 years ago now, but we moved into this building about 10 years ago. And we have a neighborhood, a very nice neighborhood right behind us, HOA and all that good stuff. So I thought one day, I'm going to go door knocking because that's what I did growing up, right?
Mhm.
I went to a small country church, but out in the middle of nowhere, but we would go door knocking. So we had like VBS or a gospel meeting coming up, and I went and door knocked and handed out flyers. Here come the police, right? You can't do that. There's no solicitation in this neighborhood. I said, well, solicitation is selling something. And I'm not selling anything. I'm just inviting people. They said, well, you're causing a disturbance. We're going to have to ask you to leave. So I did, and it was all fine. But, when Paul would go to the synagogue, he didn't preach the same way as he would when he went to the marketplace. Message was the same, but the methods changed. So I think that's important. I think we struggle in the church to become all things to all people because we want all people to become us.
Mhm.
So there's this disconnect between two cultures, between two worlds, the world that of the lost and the world that we're in of saved by the blood of Jesus, and the stereotypes that come with that. So becoming all things to all people is something I'd love y'all's opinion about, but I think it's necessary. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
it's got to be.
Yeah, the very aspect of what I would call the culture wars is nothing new.
Mm.
Even from the first century, cultures have collided. And I'll preface the statement. My father used to say this all the time. What one of the worst things that ever happened to Christianity was its legalization. Now, that's only in the parameters of the fact that it made it culturally acceptable
Mm.
to be a Christian, and even people can become cultural Christians per se, where you had mass conversions, but not real heart conversion. It was just behavior modification versus
Yeah.
actual transformation. And so I say that in the same time where we've seen both this, and we're seeing both the what I would call the heightening of evil, and also the heightening of how the gospel can be co-opted into different things within our culture right now. So this is also a point where when darkness is at its height is also where the light shines the brightest. And so in this time where we have this cultural divide is also a perfect time. I'm a forever optimist, a perfect time for the light to shine the brightest and to find opportunities to be there, because in a time of darkness, that's where light shines.
Hmm.
That's where light can really push through the most. I posted on Facebook just the other day, just scrolling through on Twitter, some things that I was seeing specifically about people that were atheists and agnostics and the rest, going, I'm seeing something different right now. I've never been back to church in a long time. I'm about to head back this
Yeah.
week, over and over and over and over again. And you wonder why that's happening. Well, it's because evil reared its face, and they finally looked at it. And it wasn't just an ethereal thing in the distance. It was a physical manifestation that they watched on video.
Mm.
And then they stopped and went, ooh, I do not like that. And so when darkness actually shows itself, that's where light steps in. And
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right that Paul becoming all things to all men For him, it was all about methodology. The message did not change. The message was the same, but how he delivered it. Well, you can even see that in the writings, the way that he would speak to those that he knew were of Jewish background, those he would write to those who were different, coming from a pagan background. You see that through the entire book of Romans is this, hey, you guys got to learn how to get along in this cultural clash of things, of who was once here and who's now and what your backgrounds are, that maybe we've forgotten a little about that. We've forgotten how to be in, I put this earlier today, the deep end of the pool. We're getting our feet shallow in the shallow end, and we're playing around a bit in this concept of evangelism, but we're not swimming yet. We're not really getting out there and having to do the hard work, which at times means getting messy. And so I use this terminology because it reminds me all the time. I'm not afraid of failure. I'm afraid of faithlessness, but I'm not afraid of failure. And success is not my goal. Faithfulness is my goal. And if I can remind myself that, for example, numbers mean nothing if they don't mean souls. There's a lot of churches out there who have large congregations and the rest who are not faithful to the gospel of Christ. And there's a lot of churches that are very small and tiny who hold on to those small numbers thinking it means their faithfulness, when in reality it means the apathy and death of their understanding of the gospel. And so numbers mean nothing one way or the other, except unless they mean souls being brought to God and lives redeemed and changed. So we have to reevaluate what success looks like, because Paul did that constantly in every audience he went to, which means there's no one size fits all. So when I get calls from people saying, how do you replicate what y'all did at Ohio State? And I go, have a bunch of players who really love God. So good luck with that starting point, because that's not automatically going to happen everywhere.
Yeah.
But instead, it's take the opportunities that are in front of you, be known, be seen, and be available for where God might wish and desire to use you, no matter the context. And then faithfulness is your goal, not success. There are things that have come out of that have been good. There are things that have come out of the baptisms and the rest that we had a few weeks ago that we're having to work through. There are some groups who like to clash over things, and we got this and we got that. And okay, I just want the students. Like, tell me how I can reach the students. That's the key thing about it. The rest doesn't matter to me. The rest is just noise and nonsense. It's distractions. Our goal is to focus on what it means to truly be people that love God and are sharing that message with people each and every day.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think you guys both hint at something that I don't know that we've actually said blatantly yet. And using Paul as the example, the message changed, the message didn't. But one of the big characteristics about Paul, even before he became Paul, he was always willing, right? Like we've talked about, putting yourself in the right position, having the right mindset, setting the right goals. But I think if anything, if the church is trying to relearn how to share the gospel, I think that maybe it starts with a push to being willing to share the gospel again.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm the skeptic in the room, but it feels like more and more often we look at guys like our ministers, guys like Brandon, Casey, who just started working here with me at Martin, and he's the campus minister, therefore he's responsible for sharing the gospel to the college students. I'm the youth minister, so I'm responsible to teaching the gospel to the youth. I've got a preacher who's, preaching. He's responsible for sharing the gospel. And we'll get to this in a minute, because I think there's value in having our own circles, but we get really comfortable staying in our own little bubble. And we're less willing, at least from my perspective, maybe we're hesitant or less willing to engage those circles in gospel conversations, because we feel as though if I go talk to my coworker about the gospel, if I go talk to my friends, coworkers, whoever, about anything under the umbrella of religion, now all of a sudden I'm forcing it onto people. And I don't know if that's because we've redefined what forcing it onto people means, or if we think that our only responsibility is responding to questions that we get. Another thing that maybe you two could chime in on is the message changed, but the message didn't. But Paul also really knew what that message was. And and Joshua, you and I have talked about it on this podcast before. Maybe one of the most pressing problems in the church today is biblical illiteracy. And so people aren't as familiar with that message as they should be. But one of the things that I like to tell people, to teens, adults, either way, if you're wearing the name of Christ, everybody knows something enough. Everybody knows enough of something to share something. Does that make sense? Like, I don't have to go get, thank goodness, I don't have to go get a PhD like Joshua over here in order to share the gospel, right? Does it help in some situations? Absolutely. There are people, especially in the academic world, that are going to listen to Joshua that aren't going to pay any attention to me whatsoever, because he's got those accolades. But everybody knows enough to say something. And so I think being willing, and maybe getting a little bit more of an understanding of what that message is certainly helps in how we approach sharing the gospel with people.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm kind of dealing with this right now personally, and this doesn't need to turn into therapy, but the issue of biblical literacy and trying to study the Bible with people. Everybody wants to study the Bible deeper until you study the Bible deeper, and then you learn that maybe what you thought your
Yeah.
entire life isn't what it needed to be. And I'm not necessarily saying false teaching per se, in the sense of the lying spirits and so forth that we test, but maybe there were some things about some doctrine, and this is true, I think, even in our own movement. Some things about doctrine that we have accepted on one hand or rejected on the other, and now's not the time or place to talk about those. But I think it goes back to like what we were talking about previously, Nathan. You kind of led off with everybody knows enough to say something to someone. One of my favorite historical figures in, I'll call it Christianity, is Thomas Aquinas. I think Thomas Aquinas was an amazing guy. I'm not going to fall to the sainthood and things like that and whatever, but he was a doctor of the church, and he was a very intelligent man, and he did write a lot. And the legend of Thomas Aquinas goes that kind of towards the end of his life, Jesus shows up to him in a vision. And I'm going to butcher the story, but something like, "Thomas, you've served me well. What can I give you in exchange?" And Aquinas says, "Nothing but you, O Lord." I'm like, man, if we as Christians had that mentality, like, hey, I don't, nothing but you, Lord. That's it. If I can just have you, Lord, like, it's infectious. You know someone, the kind of person who is just radiates the love of God. And I mean, I think of someone like Jerry Elder. Jerry Elder just radiates the love of God, and he's someone that you just always want to be around. I've never met one person who doesn't want to be around him. He doesn't have to mention one scripture. He doesn't have to mention anything about church. That man is a Christian. And he's a Christian because of his love. And that's how Jesus says his disciples are going to be known. They'll know you're my disciples by your love.
Yeah. It helps that Jerry Elder also posts a video every Tuesday called 60 Seconds of Love. Like, it's not that hard to figure it out. So Joshua, I'm gonna springboard off something you said, and Joshua, you or Brandon, either one can maybe give me your thoughts on this. How do we as Christians, because one of the aspects of this, one of the aspects of everything that's gone on lately is, at least from my perspective, working with younger people, maybe Brandon, you working with college students, how do we encourage people to step out of that comfort zone and be willing to have these conversations when, at least on a surface level, maybe the general response is something that's always going to be negative? Because one of the things that I've noticed is, and let me preface this, I don't think it's inherently wrong to pray this. I'm not coming after anybody that's ever said this. But one of the things that I personally am not a fan of is when people pray, Lord, everything that's going on in the world right now, it's all terrible, it's all evil, please come back quickly. And I understand the sentiment behind that, but there's also a sense for me in which if we're going to stay along the line of Paul, Paul also had that mentality, but Paul also knew it was better to stick around for on the behalf of those who needed him. And so how do we encourage people to maybe understand that your mindset doesn't have to be, man, I can't, all I want to do is leave this place and go on to heaven, which we know is better. We know is better. But there's still so much work that needs to be done. There are still so many people that need to know who Christ is. Where do we bridge that gap?
I'll say this. One of the, I forget where I heard it recently. It's not original to me, but a man once said that the most unfair thing about God is his long suffering nature.
Mm.
And it's unfair to him, not to us. It's unfair to him. And that's why I'm grateful that in my own prayers, where I might make that claim, where I say, Lord, come quickly. And in some ways, I even made that this past week with the passing of my grandfather, that I long to be reunited, that I think God takes into account my understanding of the moment, my understanding and lack of understanding of eternity, my lack of understanding of time, of what I mean. And in this world, that's why I remind myself that every day when I wake up, it's a gift from God, and that this gift is for me to do his will. And the gift is also that others might come to know him. And that there's that duality of how God can work through both my pain, through both my joy, through both my sorrow, through both my excitement for the new day, watching my children grow, watching growing old with my wife. Like all of these different things have this kind of duality to them when it comes to God, that both his long-suffering nature, which is a gift to the world, and it's also an opportunity for me to do that which he has called me to do. Now that's hard because I'm the one who feels that tension, that tension in between, as I use with our students, the no longer and the not yet. I can no longer go back to the way things once were, as much as I wish I could, but I'm not yet where I want to be. And as I note to my college students all the time, we live in a hallway in this world between what once was and where we will be in the end. And in that hallway, it's hard. It's tough at times because it doesn't always look like you want it to look like. It doesn't always do the things that you wish would happen don't always happen. But instead, what you have to realize is to remember your purpose, that you're going somewhere. And that's why when we say we are not citizens of this world, that means something. That's not just a platitude. It's not just a political statement. It's not just any of those things. When we say that I long for the day that Jesus returns, that's not a wish or a condemnation of those who won't know God in that day. That is a hope and a prayer that they will, because that day will come. And so living in between those spaces of this, as I know, no longer and not yet, is where so many of us have to live. And hopefully that tension, though, pushes us back to the reality of the moment we are in. This, as I call it, the perpetual present. This is where we are right now. This is the moment we have, which means that the conversation I'm having with a college student may be the only one I get, maybe the only one. And if I had just one more thing I wish that they could know, what would it be? And it's not just that I love them, but that God loves them. Not just that there is a truth, but that this is the truth. And that to share those individual things changes, hopefully, our perspective as we live in that tension.
Yeah, I had a great professor at Faulkner who said, you asked me about the second coming, and I don't know if I'm for it or against it. And what he meant was, if the Lord returns, that's great for those in Christ. But there are so many people that we haven't talked to who don't know and who just have yet to hear the truth. And so it's funny, we're talking about this in our Sunday morning Bible class here at Salem Creek on 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, which deals with the return of Jesus. Yep. And we're about 4 verses away from wrapping up 1st Thessalonians, but I mentioned last Sunday morning, I'm like, if the Lord comes in my lifetime, great. If he doesn't, great. It doesn't make me any difference whether he comes back or not.
Yeah.
My soul is the same, right? Because I'm in him. The difference that it makes is for those who I love and want to come to know him. But Nathan, you asked originally, the question of how do we get out there? Like how do we take this message?
Yeah.
I don't know if y'all are familiar with this guy. You're probably familiar with the name, but David Goggins wrote a book called "Can't Hurt Me." David Goggins was a former Navy SEAL. He went through Navy SEAL training. He went through BUD/S like twice or three times, something like that. He went through Army Ranger School, Special Ops. Like he's done all this stuff, and he's now this influencer of basically hurt yourself because you can. That's like his mentality.
Yeah.
But he has a rule, and that is do one hard thing every day.
Yeah.
Like, that's not a bad rule for evangelism. Like, it may be hard. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm not that great at personal evangelism in the sense of, well, I'm going to go over here and in the Walmart checkout line start talking to someone about Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
The older I get, the more introverted I get. And I'm just not that great at it. But if I could do one hard thing today, that hard thing might not be, well, I'm going to strike up a conversation about Jesus, but it might be, Walmart for me, and I'm using Walmart as an example because this is true. Walmart is literally across the street from the church building. So why not say to somebody, hey, I attend worship over here and we have a Bible study on Wednesday mornings. If you're not working, we sure would love for you to come and study the Bible with us. That would be a hard thing for somebody like me to do. But the more you do it, the better you get at it. And the more you do it, the more natural it becomes. So people, and hear this too. The Bible is clear that some people have certain gifts and other people don't. God has blessed, and I'm not saying this to, toot your horn or anything. It's just honest to God truth. God has blessed Brandon with an amazing ability to be evangelistic. That's your spiritual gift. It's amazing. And God's using you in that. God has blessed Nathan with a great way of working with kids, especially teenagers. That's your gift. I think God has blessed me with a gift of studying the Bible academically. Okay, that's my gift. That doesn't mean you can't do other things and use your gift to do other things. But you have to grow where you're planted. But growing is part of the process, right? So doing that hard thing to do the growth, I think, is necessary for all Christians.
Yeah. I had a preacher, and this is maybe just because I grew up in the rural South. I had a preacher that encouraged all Christians to become like kudzu, which, if you know what that is, you understand what it means. If you don't know what kudzu is, you're lucky. But I always had bittersweet feelings about that because I understood the process, right? Like your idea was to grow enough as a Christian that your influence could be felt far and wide. However, I've never met anybody that likes kudzu. So I don't know. Maybe that was just a bad analogy, so on and so forth. But Brandon, to something that you made a comment, I think every Christian would be better off if we took, I think it's Psalm 118 to heart, where this is the day the Lord has made, I will rejoice and be glad in it. The mentality that we have to live in that perpetual present, we'll steal that. Just for the record, we'll continue to teach that and steal that. But one of the things that he made in the video, one of the comments he made in the video, I want to hit at, is he mentioned two things that he believes kind of help move that gospel message along. And the two things, at least that I pinpointed, were relatability, relationship, that sort of thing, and being able to be vulnerable with people. I think we'd all agree that relationships and being able to be vulnerable with people help in the spreading of the gospel. People want, especially with kids, like when I work with teens, teens can really sniff out better than anybody I've ever met if you're being disingenuous or if you're peddling a bunch of stuff that you don't really know about. Teens are so good at that, and I love it. But I guess this is kind of a two-part question. Number one, how do we manage better relatability or better relationships? And then the second part of that is, what does it look like, or what does it mean to be vulnerable with people for the sake of sharing the gospel? And so I think it was Barna Group. If you're not familiar with them, you can look them up. Barna Group is great. Barna Group released research a few years ago. I think maybe it was 2023 now. But their findings basically said that 82% of people were likely to attend church service,
Mhm.
worship, Bible study, whatever, if they were invited by a close personal friend and that friend agreed to go with them, right?
Yeah.
Those two things in conjunction, the idea of being vulnerable and having relationships. So we see there's a concept of relationship is more effective than not, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that's anything new. I think that's relatively common sense. But how do we manage better relatability to the sake of being able to be evangelistic? And what does it mean to look vulnerable with people in the sense of sharing the gospel?
Well, I'll start by noting, I think you guys are spot on that, and I did note that about the video in and of itself. Um, I, I used to rail against when I was a few years ago. It's a very what I would call the me generation, the very self-centered,
Mhm.
narcissistic kind of concept, and most of them were raised into that. It wasn't a natural default. It was, I love when the parents are going, "What is wrong with these kids?" And I'm like, "You raised them." I'm like, this is on you. Why are
Yeah.
you looking at me? And so all of those types of things. But and I used to get very frustrated by that until I realized that when you have a generation that loves to talk about themselves, you have an inroads.
Mm.
In fact, I try to turn it around on its head. In fact, I joke. I said the number one evangelistic tool I have is I've learned to become fascinated by other people's stories, and that people love to talk about themselves.
Yeah.
If you give them opportunity, they will talk. And if you learn to listen in those moments, you will start hearing pain points. You will start hearing vulnerability on them. You'll hear moments where they'll stop themselves when they're about to say something and they'll go, That's a long story. And instead of just letting it go on, I'll go, I've got time. Tell me more. And that the more of those conversations, and this, the irony is that it's often people say, I just want people to listen to me. And I'll go, correct. So the starting point for me, if you want to talk about relationship, it's being someone where people know it's okay to listen, that you're going to be someone that listens. But for me, especially, I think it's the cold calling aspect of people thinking that relationships, that evangelism is about like a cold call, just randomly walking up to somebody you don't know and saying that. I always tell people, I don't do that all the time. I look for moments. And I'll give this living example. I was standing, and this was probably 2.5 years ago now, standing in a line at a Starbucks getting coffee in the morning. And this girl walks up to me and she's standing behind me. And all of a sudden she says, Am I going to hell? And I went, Hi, I'm Brandon. It's nice to meet you. Like, where did that come from? And she said, Your shirt. And I was like, Oh, it said Buckeyes for Christ.
Yeah.
And I was like, Oh, wow. And I said, Well, it's nice to meet you first. And then also the whatever that just happened. I said, Can I ask you a question? Why would you think that? And she said, Well, I mean, obviously I'm not a Christian. I think she said she's a lesbian. She's like, I'm just not. And I went, I don't, let me just start off by saying this. I don't have the power to do that. I don't have the power to send you to hell. I don't. I said, but can I ask you another question? This is typically my go-to is, who is Jesus to you? And her answer was, well, he's nothing. I don't even believe that he existed. And I went, well, then I'm even more fascinated by your question. Why would you worry about something that you don't believe to be true? I said, maybe there's something more to it. So could I buy your coffee? And so we sat down, found out there was family trauma. There was all sorts of stuff. A dad who had been a preacher, all sorts of things through the years that had led her to just have this uh, disdain and frustration and pain when it came to church. Now, I'd love to tell you that there's a great ending to that story. I've never seen her again since then, but I do know I hope she'll remember the conversation.
Yeah.
I understand that. And so that's about as cold call as they get. It's where you just randomly walk up. What real evangelism happens when you learn to be fascinated by the people you sit next to in your day job. And when you listen to them and say, Hey, tell me about your family. Tell me how your kids are going. How's things going on? What's going on these days? And you find out, hey, well, actually, my husband just lost his job. And you learn to listen for those moments of opportunities where God helps people walk through those things, where there's the benefits of the good news of Jesus is that God is not just good about salvation. He's not an eternal life insurance policy. Too many Christians treat him that way. He's just good for when I die. That in this world, Jesus also changes lives, that he changes how you view things, how you can walk through the hardness of this life. And that's to me is the starting point because that's something you can teach people. That's something where, and you guys are right, there are different talents and different abilities. Not everybody is meant to be a preacher. Like, it's just not. Not everybody's meant to be an elder. Just because you have somebody that's the age and the rest doesn't mean they're qualified. Also, deacons and youth ministry, you guys know this, that there's individuals where we've sometimes had to just kind of fit people where they don't belong, and it ends up hurting rather than actually helping the church. So instead, a church should learn to lean into where the gifts are, the gifts that they do have. And in doing that, though, you can start to teach people the basics of just learn to listen for points of pain, listen to people and what their stories are. Because, and the way I like to put it is learn to become fascinated again. Learn to be fascinated by others and not yourself. Because if you start from just, all right, I'm going to tell you the gospel, I'm going to tell you the gospel, you don't know what part of the gospel is going to reach them. You don't know if it's the fact that the Son of God came and died on the cross and took away their sins, or if it's a God who understands their pain and suffering, or if it's a God who walked and took their place in that moment. You don't know that yet. And so if you can listen, that's where you can make sure that the message, as Paul did, is tailored to the audience that is in front of him. And that's where I think we have to be careful about beating people over the head, is they're hearing a gospel that does not resonate. And that's on the messenger, not the message.
Yeah, I don't know if either one of you have ever had the opportunity to talk to a group of young people and put your ginormous foot in your even bigger mouth by
every week.
Yeah, well, so just a personal example. Brandon, to your point, I mean, it's worked where, we went through a series of who God was when I was working with teens before, and one of the intro lessons was God the loving Father, and how that everybody should be able to at least picture the ideal father, and so on and so forth, and to have a high school girl come up to you and be like, my dad sexually abused me for 5 years and then left. Like, what's a loving father? I mean, you talk about a punch in the gut. Not everybody comes from the same place that we come from. And so learning about people, I mean, to your point, is absolutely right. Joshua, did you have anything?
I'm wondering, because I see a shift in churches. And part of that, I think, is like Brandon said earlier. I'm in 100% agreement that the worship service is for the saints. Okay, 100% agreement. But I'm seeing a push to make the preacher, in particular, more casual, more approachable. The suit and tie doesn't seem to be as popular anymore. I think there's wisdom in that to some degree. I grew up public speaking, right? So 4-H, FFA, student council, speech contest, all those things. And the general rule was, if you're the speaker, you dress one notch above your audience. So if your audience is going to be wearing button downs and khakis, then you need to at least have on a tie or a sports coat or maybe a suit, whatever. That's neither here nor there. What I'm curious about is, because what you guys are talking about with being approachable, there's a stigma that comes, particularly with preachers. That 3-foot elevation on the stage is almost enough to put you in the clouds in the eyes of some people. And it can be hard sometimes to make yourself vulnerable and approachable. You don't want to overdo that. I know a lot of preachers will tell their personal stories and their journey. And I think that's great. Paul used his testimony everywhere he went. And I think that's one thing we don't do enough of, is tell how Jesus has impacted our life.
100%.
But I guess I'm adding a question to already asked questions of, what does approachability mean even in the assembly of the local congregation? I don't know if that makes sense or not. I hope it does.
Yeah. So I actually heard this phrase earlier this week, and it stuck with me, and I'm going to adapt it, whatever the word is. I think that there's a sense in which being vulnerable in certain environments is really, really helps with being approachable. Joshua, you said it. For whatever reason, when you get tagged with the title minister, preacher, evangelist, that sounds so professional, and it sounds like we're so unapproachable. And being able to be vulnerable with people, I think, is important. But being vulnerable with people means showing them your wounds. And so there's a difference between being vulnerable and being intimate. So being vulnerable means, sorry, let me back up. Being vulnerable means showing people your scars. Being intimate means showing people your wounds.
Mm,
Not
I
everybody
like
needs
that.
to know exactly what you're going through right now.
Yeah.
Sometimes they do. I mean, and sometimes you and I know as ministers, you've got closer groups of people who can help you with your wounds, your intimacy, the things that you're currently going through right now. But being able to show your scars, I think, is significant. And the more that we can do to show people we're just normal people, and I use that term loosely because I don't ever consider myself normal. Like that's I'm a little weird. Um, but understanding that just because we might have a title and an office and the church might pay us doesn't mean we're not human. And so being willing, kind of what Brandon said, being willing to engage with people, being willing to invest in people outside of a church setting. One of the things that is crucial to me as a youth minister is making sure my kids know I care about them outside of Bible class. And I think people need to know that they're cared about outside of the quote unquote church setting. Um, there's a I forget who created it, but there's a concept of bringers, teachers, and keepers, and it's evangelism model. Um, but that keeper role, helping people understand that they're cared about more than just as a number. Well, you got me to church, and now you don't really care what's going on. I think that plays a massive role in how people view us, how we view people, and how we cultivate relationships, that they know that we care about them as a person more so than a number.
I think you can also change a lot about how people view vulnerability by, especially if you're a minister and if you're in that role professionally. I hate using that terminology, but the reality is that's an aspect of what it is, um, because it is meant to be a calling. There we are held to a higher standard,
Mm.
and that is the reality of Scripture. It's the reality of culture, and that's why we live in glass houses and everything that we do. And one of the ways that I've often said that, when you live in a glass house, you have to be careful that people, don't throw stones and all those things. But people also tend to throw stones in your house. Well, they don't tend to throw nearly as many as if they're inside your house. And so one of the things that my wife have done for years, and in some ways I would say it's vulnerability, is we make a habit of hospitality, which is a biblical mandate that we often overlooked in churches. Um, and so our home is open. I still have teens that show up in my home from 10, 15 years ago, passing through, and the rest, whether they're coming in different areas, they know that there's always a place to stay at our home. But even weekly things, it's one of those things we've often forgotten. Uh, the church gathered together weekly and even daily at times in the first century to encourage one another, to uplift one another. So part of our ministry here, and this is where I don't like using the word ministry, because it becomes so programmatic as opposed to it being real, what I would call real. Every Monday night, we have members of our church who provide a meal for our college and young professionals. Why? It's not because they don't have money. It's not because of that. It's because of the relational aspect of being together, of being able to actually spend time eating together. So that's what we did last night. Tuesday night, we're on campus and we have an outreach and evangelism opportunity where they know they can invite friends, but they don't necessarily invite them on Monday nights yet. Monday nights tends to be more internal. Tuesday nights tends to be more external, but they need both. They need opportunities to feel like they're connecting in ways. The weird part about it is I've often said throughout that ministry that you have to create a culture within your church where it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to stay that way.
Yep.
And so people need to feel like nobody here is putting on a facade. Nobody here is dressing up, which kind of goes to the whole premise of the clothing. But at the same time, we're moving somewhere. We're trying to be more than what we are in those moments. Which is why I tell my, almost every Monday night, we always ask them, hey, who's going to be here next week because of something you said this week? Who's going to be here next year? And I did that when I first got here 3 years ago. And it's been, we hit that 1 year milestone every year. And there's always somebody here who goes, y'all remember, man, there's like 6 other people here that were not here last year because of what was said during this past year and the rest. And when that starts to happen, people start to become more vulnerable even about themselves, and they tend to find a little bit more courage, and it becomes a snowball effect. It really does within the community, because your culture has changed, and your culture of vulnerability is really about openness. It's really about just making yourself available, which is why to this day, I give out my phone number. There's a lot of ministers that don't, because they have to, turn life on and off. And I totally get that. But I think I'm at like 12,000 numbers that aren't my phone number now. But guess what? It's not necessarily that I don't turn off my phone at times. I do, for my family's sake, but I want to be available. And availability to people means something in this world.
100%. So we're going to kind of wrap up here. I want to be respectful of Brandon's time and everybody else. But we're going to kind of rapid fire here at the very, very end. I'll go first, and then Joshua, Brandon, whoever wants to jump in. Practical advice for Christians moving forward. When talking about evangelism, when you're talking about relationships, when you're talking about how do we best respond to the world with the gospel. Best practical advice you guys can give. I've got two. Number one, remember that everybody is somebody. I've got a bracelet that says "Think Souls." I wear it every single day. We have to remember, Brennan, kind of to your encounter in the coffee shop, you have to remember that everybody is somebody. Everybody has a past. Everybody has a present. Everybody has a future. And until we learn to look at people as souls that are cared for by God, that are created in the image of God, understanding that their life doesn't look the same as ours, we're never going to be as effective as we can be. So remember that everybody is somebody, and then maybe the cop-out answer, focus on the fruit of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit is not bitterness and despair and cynicism and hopelessness. It's love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and faithfulness and all those things. That if we pour into people, if we're focused on the fruit of the Spirit, singular fruit of the Spirit, it manifests itself in a way that can't help but be seen. So that's my practical advice for people moving forward, if you've stuck around with us this long.
All right. I have three, but I promise they're quick. First,
always got to one up me. God,
no, sorry. First, go to church. Go to church. There are a lot of people who just want to start carrying things out without having the proper knowledge, the proper training, and not having their hearts right. It's very get the log out of your eye before you get the speck out of your brother's eye. You got to get yourself right before you get somebody else right. So number one, go to church. Off of that is number two, which is know your stuff. Read a book and get in the Word. But as much as you get in the Word, find a resource that is good, credible, and helpful, and get in that, because you're going to be met with opposition. So not only do you need to know what you believe, which is a really good, take time to ask, what do I believe and why do I believe it? That's also helpful.
Yeah.
But what do they believe? What are their arguments, and what are the weaknesses in their arguments and my arguments? And, prepare yourself. And then number three, I'm not convinced, and I'm happy to be proven wrong. I'm not convinced that anyone is going to come to Christ in the comment section of Facebook. So let's maybe direct our efforts to seek and save the lost the way the Lord and the apostles did, which is what we've been talking about this entire time, becoming all things to all people. And, Paul wrote letters, but if we get so distracted by social media and things of that nature, it can be misinterpreted. It can be used against us, and maybe our message isn't exactly as good as we thought it was. So,
Paul also had relationships with people he wrote letters to. So,
fair enough.
There's
he was also inspired.
Yeah, well, that's it. There's that.
That's helpful. Well, I guess I'll add just a couple more here. I don't know how many, but I think I have them in my head. The first one would be, and it kind of goes along with what you were just saying there, Joshua, that read an old book. Read ones that have survived the test of time.
Mm-hmm.
There is a fascinating thing in our culture where we think anything that is new or brand new or on the top bestsellers automatically means it's got wisdom or value to it. Read City of God, Augustine of Hippo, read Thomas Aquinas, read G.K. Chesterton and C.S. Lewis and a lot of these older writers. And like anything of ancient lore that's not inspired scripture, learn to discern, learn to eat the flesh and spit out the bones scenario, but learn. Don't just assume that you know or become a Google scholar. Instead, be someone who actually has a depth of understanding in these things, because people can tell the difference. People can tell the difference if you've just looked it up 5 minutes before and you're trying to show them an article versus something that you've spent time considering and pondering. The second thing I'd note is this. When you have opportunity to share with people, don't be the expert you are not. I used to say to people all the time, don't be prettier than you are, which means don't be afraid to say the words, I don't know, as long as you follow it up with, but I'll be happy to find out together. You see, then all of a sudden you're going from, I don't know the answer to your question, but you and I can figure this out. Why don't we sit down and study it? You see, it's an instant way to have a conversation then with this person by simply making yourself available. Then off of that, and this would be for me be the key thing, is don't be afraid. I don't know what it is we're so afraid of. I mean, I understand, and at times it's because I think we quantify everything based off of how we feel, but our feelings are the heart is a liar. And a lot of times I think that fear that is instilled in us is because Satan is actually terrified of what we might do if we would step out on faith and say, I don't know what's going to happen today, but if the worst thing that can happen to me is that I die, then that's nothing in the end. In the end, that death has already been defeated. So I don't know what I'm fearing. Fearing what people might think about me. I already feel like we already worry about that at times, and it's not to our benefit.
Yeah.
And so instead, to focus on being who God has called us to be. And in doing that, to become fearless in our conversations, to learn to become listeners into what people are going through, to look for opportunities to tell and share the story of God. And so that would be my advice, is look for opportunities, be fascinated by people, read a good old book, and learn to be silent when you don't know the answer, as long as you follow it up with, but we'll find out together.
Yeah. All great stuff. Brandon, thank you again for being on, man. Great conversation. Loved having you on.
Pleasure.
Love getting to pick your brain. As always, we encourage everybody to send us your questions, comments, whatever. If you find a video that you want us to talk about, please be sure to do so. Forgot to mention it at the beginning. If you're still around, want to be sure to throw the plug. We are part of the Ministry Network of Ministry League Network of Podcasters. That's what we are. So you can find all of their stuff on YouTube or ministryleague.com. You can find us here on YouTube, wherever you're listening, wherever you get podcasts. Joshua, thanks again. Brandon, as always, really appreciate it anytime we have a guest on. And until next time, guys, we'll see you then.